Today we look at one of boxing's most underrated heavyweights. How good was the Black Prince Peter Jackson? Peter Jackson was born on July 3, 1861, in Christiansted, Danish West Indies. This is now the U.S. Virgin Islands. Jackson stood 6 feet 1.5 with a 77-inch reach. He had an aggregate weight of 197 pounds for his career. Jackson's career spanned from 1882 to 1899. He had 42 wins, 5 losses, and 3 draws. 29 of his wins were by knockout. He had 24 no-decision bouts and 2 no contests. His win percentage was 54, and his knockout percentage was 37. Peter Jackson is one of boxing's great black heavyweights of the late 1800s. His combination of size, strength, and athleticism made him a crowd favorite as fans and publications saw him as a legitimate threat to then world heavyweight champion John L. Sullivan. Jackson was an adaptable fighter who could change his style for the opponent. He was also known as a scientific boxer with a high-level skill set to accompany his quickness. Jackson first started boxing in Australia, where he came of age and ultimately became a citizen. On July 6, 1884, Jackson met Bill Farnan for the Australian Heavyweight Championship. This was the first heavyweight title fight fought under the Marquess of Queensberry rules in Australia. Jackson was still fairly raw at the time, and Farnan stopped him in the 4th round of their scheduled fight to the finish. Farnan used a mix of heavy body blows to slow down the bigger Jackson. A return bout was scheduled for September 23, 1884, and Farnan again gained a big lead on Jackson, nearly knocking him out. Supporters of Jackson stormed into the ring, and a melee ensued. The fight was declared a draw as the contest was scrapped from that point. Jackson continued to fight in Australia through 1888, even winning the Australian heavyweight title in 1886 after defeating Tom Lees, getting better, and learning more of the craft before heading to the United States of America, where he would be matched with the best competition available. On August 24, 1888, Jackson would get his first major test against Old Chocolate George Godfrey, a prominent black Canadian heavyweight in a fight billed as the Colored Heavyweight Championship. The fight took place in San Francisco, California. The two men went to war through the first half of the fight with the older Godfrey holding his own against the bigger and more skilled Jackson. Both men were bloodied, and in the back half of the fight, Jackson started to use his jab more and eventually started to tee off on Godfrey. The referee stepped in to call the fight in the 19th round, declaring Jackson the victor. On April 26, 1889, Jackson was matched against contender Patsy Cardiff in a fight to the finish. Both Jackson and Cardiff had their moments early on, exchanging heavy blows. In the 10th round, the bout was stopped when Cardiff suffered an arm injury and couldn't continue fighting, handing Jackson the victory. By this time, the calls for a matchup between John L. Sullivan, the world heavyweight champion, and Peter Jackson were deafening. Sullivan drew the color line and refused to face Jackson. Jackson kept winning and gaining more and more popularity during the run. In a 1909 interview with the San Francisco Call, Sullivan stated the following with regards to him drawing the color line and not facing Jackson.
Parson V. Davils, manager of Jackson, once claimed to have a telegram from me telling him to go ahead with the details of a fight with Jackson. There were never any such articles drawn or even suggested that I would have signed. The nearest I came to fighting Jackson was once when the question was put up to me squarely. I said that if they got $20,000 I would cover it, and would go into a room with Jackson and have it out, but that I would never agree to meet him in the ring in public. That ended the attempts to get me to fight Jackson.
Frustrated by the inability to secure a matchup with Sullivan, Jackson set sail to England. On November 11, 1889, he beat the English heavyweight champion, Jem Smith, after Smith was disqualified for using dirty tactics. Before heading back to the United States, Jackson stopped in Dublin, Ireland, to take on the Irish giant Peter Marr. Marr found success fighting from middleweight up to heavyweight and was one of the greatest boxers of the 1890s and early 1900s. The 20-year-old Marr was undefeated at the time, though it was still fairly early in his career. Jackson used his size to successfully outbox Marr to the point of him being unable to answer the bell for the fourth round. Jackson would then head back to the United States, where he met and won a 5-round points victory over contender Denver Ed Smith, dropping him several times but unable to finish him. After an undefeated tour in Australia through 1890, Jackson returned to San Francisco on May 21, 1891, to take on his most high-profile opponent to date, gentleman James J. Corbett, in a fight to the finish. At the time, both men were considered the legitimate challengers for John L. Sullivan, and a win by either would seemingly elevate them into a world heavyweight contest. Both men were scientific boxers and made for a compelling clash. Each had moments where they would land several significant shots, bloodying and bruising the other. As the fight wore on, the pace started to slow down, and in the 61st round, the fight was stopped and declared a draw. As history showed, Corbett would get the world heavyweight title shot a year later. In 1892, Jackson fought and defeated Australian heavyweight contender Frank Sullivan for the Commonwealth title before taking a multi-year hiatus from boxing. It wouldn't be until March 22, 1898, that a now 37-year-old Jackson would face an up-and-coming future world heavyweight champion, James J. Jeffries. No longer a formidable fighter and years removed from the ring, Jackson was blasted in 3 rounds by Jeffries. Jackson would fight once more in a losing effort in 1899. Jackson faced 4 Hall of Famers. His most notable fights were against George Godfrey, Peter Marr, James J. Corbett, and James J. Jeffries. Peter Jackson died of tuberculosis on January 13, 1901, at 40. Jackson is another sad story of a boxer unable to get his deserved shot at boxing's greatest crown due to his race. Jackson cemented his legacy in the annals of boxing by fighting any willing challenger and is widely regarded as the best heavyweight of his era, despite not getting a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. His overall makeup set a precedent for what was to come many years down the road. Jackson was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990.